Hey everyone, today we're going to go through how you can use make.com to scrape any website. And we're going to go through the different scraping methods that are available from within make.com. We're going to start from the basics of just using the HTTP module within make.com, using different hidden APIs, using RSS feeds, all the way up to using different tools that will let us do more advanced scraping. In all of these scenarios, we're going to also apply AI as a way to extract data, but at the beginning, I'll also show you a non-AI way where we will use either regex or a CSS selector. Now, this is going to be a very detailed tutorial where we're going to go through everything step by step. So I would recommend grabbing a cup of tea, cup of coffee, something to drink. If you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback throughout this video, feel free to leave a comment. And with that, let's get into it. So to begin with, we're going to start by using the built-in methods within make.com. And the most basic method is just to use the HTTP module within make.com. So the HTTP module you can find by just typing in HTTP, or you can type in request. And what we're going to do is use the maker request. So what this is a module that lets you make different types of HTTP requests. So for those of you who are non-technical, it's kind of like the backbone of the internet. Whenever you visit a website, whenever you request data, chances are there is a HTTP request happening in the background. So for very basic sites, you can use this module. So as an example, I'm just going to scrape my own website, dumplingai.com. If I put the URL in here and I just put the method as get. So just quickly talking through the methods. When you're making a HTTP request, you can choose a method. Get generally refers to you retrieving information. You're not writing any information to the system. Post or put generally means that you are writing or updating system data in the system. Delete means you're deleting. For scraping, I would say 90% of the time you'll be using get, and maybe 10% of the time you're using the post request. So for most cases, just start with a get, especially if it's a basic website. It's probably what you need. Headers, query string, all this stuff is quite, I'd say, a bit more technical, a bit more advanced. So for now, we're just going to leave that blank. So I've just put in the URL. If I run this now, it should be able to pull in the HTML from my website. So if I have a look at the data, you can see this is all the HTML. And you can see it's super long, right? Like it's just so much text. And that's because even though there's not that much like written text here, if I inspect the page, you'll see that there is just all this code, right? To do with the styling, what the buttons do, all the packages I'm relying on my website, all that sort of stuff. So this is the basic way, right? And once you've done this, there's a couple of ways to process this, right? If you're a programmer or you're a bit more technical, you're probably familiar with using CSS selectors. And what that is really, if you go inspect here, you might look for the H1 tag on the page, or you might look for a certain class name or a certain ID. Unfortunately, there is no super easy way to use CSS selectors within make.com. So if you wanted to do something like that, you'd either need to use a third-party service, or you use what's built into make.com, which is basically just regex. Again, this is not the best experience. Like it's quite a bit of work, which is why I'll show you some other methods in the future. But just for completeness, I'm going to show you this. So you can feed in the HTML, and you can turn the HTML into text, potentially as a starting point, just to clean it up a little bit, depending on what you're capturing, or you can straight up just match a pattern. And this is what's using regex, or a regular expression. Now, regex is notoriously quite hard to write. If I quickly just search up this regex tool here, this is like a regex pattern to match YouTube video URLs. You can see that it's super, super confusing. And most developers would sort of try to avoid regex where possible. Fortunately, these days, you can use ChatGPT to help you write regex, and generally it gives you a pretty good first pass. So just type in, give it an example of the URL or the pattern that you want to extract, and then it will do a generally pretty good job at writing regex to help you extract that information. So if we turn this into, let's have a look. If I turn this into text, right? And pass in the HTML, which is just this data. Let's see what this looks like now. See, we've got the text, right? It's a bit more cleaned up. It's mainly just the content on the page now. So it's looking pretty good. You can see it's still got the logo and sort of different items, like the menu items and all that sort of stuff on the page. But for the most part, it's pretty good. And here you've got sort of the starter, all the pricing and everything, right? So if you're using an AI model to ingest this information and process it, this is, for the most part, good enough, because this is relatively clean and the AI will probably do a lot better with this data as opposed to the HTML data. Now, before I move on, I'm going to show you another way to do this, which is using a tool. So Dumpling AI, this is a product that I run, and we have a module here that lets you scrape URL. If it's a very basic site, honestly, you can just get away with doing this. So the HTTP module with the text parser. But if you wanted the data to be slightly cleaner, you could use Dumpling AI with our scrape module. And then you put in your URL that you want to scrape, and then you can select what content you want back. Do you want the HTML, you want Markdown, all that sort of stuff. And there's an option here whether you want to clean the data or not. So cleaning the data will remove all the menus, the footers, and all that sort of stuff. But for the most part, it's probably fine if you keep it. Cool. So that's the super basic one. And whether you use this or this, generally the next step is either putting it into some sort of regex. So that's the text parser here, and using a match pattern, or these days, for the most part, you're probably just going to put it into ChatGPT or OpenAI and create a completion here, where you might say, let's run through an example, right? Let's use GPT-4o or use 3.5 Turbo. It's pretty simple what we're doing. And I'm just going to say to the AI, extract the value prop and pricing. And here I'm just going to pass in the clean data. So I'm going to just use the output from Dumpling AI, but you could just use the text output from your HTML to text parser as well. I'm just going to use this because it's slightly better for this use case. And then max token number 500. And then I'm just going to say, just define the format, return as a JSON object. And then I'm going to say, we're going to do value prop string as well as pricing string, right? And then down here, what I'm going to do is turn this into a JSON object. Cool. So for that, I'm going to do is delete these two actually, because I don't need them anymore. I'm going to drag this, unlink this, drag this across, and then I'm going to run this. So it will scrape from Dumpling AI, get the value prop, and then get the pricing. This is sort of the most basic scraping you can do. If you don't want to use OpenAI, you could use regex, but if you're non-technical, be prepared for some pain is what I will say to you. But if you're technical, then I'm sure you've used regex before. So bit of a catch-22 there. Cool. So it's scraped it. And now ChatGPT is parsing it, and you can see we've got the value prop as well as the pricing. And then from here, what you want to do generally is turn it into a make.com variable that you can use. So something like a JSON parser, and you can turn it into a variable and then you can save it. So at the end of this video, I'm going to run through a more end-to-end flow where I have a Google Sheet with a number of URLs. I will scrape them, extract the data, and then write it back into a Google Sheet with the data that we've collected. Cool. So this is the most basic type of approach for web scraping, where you do the HTTP request, or you can use a tool like Dumpling AI. Now this works great for these sorts of sites where it's all static and very basic, but if you've done web scraping before, you know that some sites are dynamic. So as an example, right, Redfin is a good example of this. If I go back here and I use the HTTP module here, and I make a request again, and let's say I want to scrape this property listing here, right, which is just a standard property listing on Redfin. So if I put this in here and I do a GET request, you'll see that it's very easy to run into issues. So this one here, it's going to have, this request could not be satisfied, right? So in this case, it's probably because we are being blocked, but there are other cases where like you do get the content back, but you don't get all the content because a lot of websites these days use JavaScript, which means that they might load the basic template first, and then use JavaScript to hit the network again, the server again, and retrieve even more information. So it's sort of like information gets retrieved incrementally. And also sometimes the JavaScript is responsible for rendering elements on the page as well. So if you don't run that JavaScript, you're not going to have all the elements on the page or in your HTML. So in those cases, the HTTP module kind of falls over. There are ways around it. Like if you watch other people's YouTube videos, they're going to say like, you can sort of copy the cookies from your requests and that sort of stuff. Like that will work for a little while, and then your scraping thing is going to break. It's not going to be that stable, which means you're just going to have to come into here every few days, refresh the page, look for your cookies, copy your cookies over, and then hope it works. But the same sort of principle behind these hidden APIs. To be honest, they're not really hidden. They're just APIs. But yeah, sometimes if the website is not from a big company, you can just use the APIs. It's a fast way to retrieve the data. So we've covered two-ish approaches. So HTTP request, as well as using like the hidden APIs or just using an API to fetch data. We also talked about some roadblocks, which is sometimes the site will block you. Sometimes like they use JavaScript rendering. So using the HTTP module won't actually fetch all the data that you need. In those cases, using a tool like Dumpling AI will be enough. It doesn't have to be Dumpling AI. There's a couple of different scraping tools out there, but using a tool that actually runs a web browser in the backend and then renders the page for you to give you the content, that will actually get all the data. Now, at the beginning of this video, I also promised another technique, which is using RSS feeds. So if you're scraping things like blogs, oftentimes they will have RSS feeds. And what an RSS feed is what does RSS stand for? Real-time syndicated, I think, is what it stands for. Let's ask ChatGPT. Anyways, so things like blogs, newsletters, these sorts of things will have an RSS feed. So every time they publish something new, they will publish it to this feed. And what you can do is scrape the feed. Now, what a lot of people don't know is if you're scraping Reddit, Reddit actually has RSS feeds. So what you have to do is actually just go to your URL and type in .rss. And you can see that we have this feed here, right? And now, like, this probably looks very confusing to you, but if I just put this into a RSS feed viewer, you can sort of see what this looks like. Oh, I don't want to copy the whole thing. So if I put this in and I view this RSS feed, you can see it's sort of turned into a feed, right? Which replicates the different posts on Reddit. Anyways, make.com has a way to ingest these feeds. So if I type in RSS, you can say like watch RSS feed items, which means that every time there's a new item published to the RSS feed, so in this case, there's a new post on that RSS feed on Reddit that I'm looking at, this automation will trigger. Or you can just straight up retrieve different items in that list. So I've put in this RSS feed here. You can choose what dates you want it from. I'm going to just return 3 items. And if I run this now, you'll see that I have sort of a couple of different Reddit posts, right? We've got OpenAI inside as one of this, got the image, all that sort of stuff. And then you got this. Yeah, that sort of how it works. Downside of this is you're limited to the data fields within the RSS feed. So sometimes the RSS feed won't include things that you want. So as an example, maybe you want to scrape all the Reddit post comments as well. So the RSS feed doesn't include that sort of stuff. And I don't think it includes the upvote data as well. So if you wanted to count like the number of upvotes and that sort of stuff, this wouldn't really work. In this case, like if you wanted all that data, you would have to scrape it using normal methods. I'm pretty sure Reddit uses JavaScript, so you can't use the HTTP module. Let's give it a go actually. The other thing is I think Reddit is increasingly behind a login wall as well. So that's the other blocker here. If I drag in a HTTP module and make a request, and let's connect, put this in. Chances are we'll either get blocked or the content just won't really be there because it's all JavaScript rendered. So lots of styling, but not much content so far. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's much content in here. So if I just quickly do this here and unlink this. And then if I turn this into text, HTML to text, just to see what it looks like, there's probably not going to be very much data in here. see that, yeah, blocked by network security. So that's the issue there. Now okay, cool. So now let's work through a more realistic example. So let's say, for example, I have a list of property listings and I need to scrape the data for each listing. So I know everyone does their tutorials on like Zillow and Redfin. I'm just going to pick a different site just to switch it up a little bit, but the logic and workflow will be roughly the same. So this is a classified property listing site in New Zealand. And this is just a random page where they're just listing a property. And you can see if we do the standard method, let's just scrape a single page first. If I just drag in my HTTP module here and drag this across and then put in the URL. And we're going to do what we said before, which is HTML to text. Put in the data. Then if I run this from the beginning, ideally we should get the information back, assuming that it's not JavaScript rendered and all that sort of stuff. Let's have a look. Oh, so see, it says enable JavaScript to continue. So this is one of the roadblocks I mentioned earlier, where if the site you're scraping requires JavaScript, the HTTP module will not work. So in this case, we're going to have to use Dumpling AI. So I'm going to delete these and replace it with Dumpling AI. And here you can just use the scrape URL. It only costs a single credit on our platform. And I want the markdown back. So if I scrape that, I should get the content back, and you can see we have this content. Nice. This is all the data that we need. Now, I just realized I forgot to mention a new method of scraping that people are starting to consider. Now, I made a video on this already. It's called vision-based scraping. There's obviously a lot of downsides with it, but there's also a lot of upsides. So downsides are it is a lot more expensive than other scraping methods. The upside obviously being that it is very robust. It doesn't matter if the site you're scraping changes their structure, as long as the data is there, vision-based scraping will continue to work. So if you wanted to do vision-based scraping, let me just quickly run through an example. What you would need to do is take a screenshot of a page. So you can use Dumpling AI or any other module, and you can take a screenshot of the page here. And then what you would need to do is pass it into GPT-4o or any other model that accepts images as input. So all the Claude 3 models, so Haiku, Opus, all that sort of stuff, they will accept image input. Or you can use GPT-4o, GPT-4v. If they accept image input, you can put it into the model and get the model to extract the specific data that you need. If you want a sort of detailed tutorial on that, just check on my channel. There's a vision-based scraping tutorial, which goes into that in depth. The other approach there is if you don't want to do that all yourself, there is a method in Dumpling AI, which will just do it for you. And it's called extract data. And what we do here is this is like a more advanced version where we pass the data into a multimodal LLM. So we pass in like a screenshot, we pass in the markdown, all that sort of stuff into the LLM and get it to extract data. So as an example, this is the site we're looking at. Let's say I want to extract the address string, and then I'm going to say, what else is there? I want the address, I want the value, and I want the agency reference, right? So value, so number, and then agency reference, which is a string. So here I've just put in the URL and then just requested the data that I want. And Dumpling AI in the backend will run a pretty advanced scraping methodology to extract that data. So here we've got the data ready to use in make.com. So address, value, as well as the agency reference. Awesome. Cool. So just to go back to our workflow, we now know how to scrape an individual listing. So how would this actually look in terms of a workflow? So generally what you'll have is you'll have a list of URLs, and you will need to iterate through each of the URLs, scrape the data, and then update your data store, right? So in this case, I'm using Google Sheets. Most people use Google Sheets or Airtable in make.com. So what I need to do here is go create a new Google Sheet. I'm going to say, let's say URL, and these are the URLs that we're scraping, right? And so I have one URL here, but maybe will go back and collect a few more. So if this one looks good, this one looks good. So I just copy those URLs over to just give us a little bit of an example. So real estate scraping example. Then what we need to do is add columns for the piece of data that we want to extract, right? So maybe we have address, we have value, and then we have agency. We don't actually need agency reference. Maybe like, what else is there? Bedrooms, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, right? Number bedrooms and bathrooms. So maybe that's what we want. So we want to go through each of these, scrape the data, and then update our spreadsheet. So what we do is come back here, put in the Dumpling AI module. Now, depending on the site you're scraping, you can just use the HTTP module, right? If the site is quite basic and easy to scrape, just use the HTTP module. It's cheaper. Here you can scrape, or you can, if you're really lazy, just use the extract data, and Dumpling AI will just extract the data for you. But otherwise, we'll just scrape the raw markdown. And then from the markdown, we're going to manually get ChatGPT to extract the data. So here we're going to drag in the ChatGPT module. We're going to use 3.5 Turbo, which will be a bit more cost efficient. And we're going to put in our prompts, right? So it'll be like extract address, number of bedrooms, and number of bathrooms. And then return as JSON object. And then we might put in all of these. So address, value. I forgot about value. Value. And here we would put it in as string, number, and here I'm just defining the types, because when you define types, the output from ChatGPT is generally a lot better. And then down here, just passing in what we scraped, which is the Dumpling AI content. And then, max tokens, 500. We want JSON output. So because we're doing it ourselves, we also need to parse the JSON output from ChatGPT. So we need to parse it. And then finally, what we'll need to do is update our Google Sheets. Now, I've forgotten something here. So this will actually return multiple URLs instead of a single URL. So we can't just go straight to Dumpling AI. We actually need to iterate here. So what we need to do is break this link. So this will respond with multiple URLs. So let me just quickly set it up first. So I'm going to connect, select my sheet, and then connect all of this. Let's search for all of this. What we want to do now is turn this into an array, which is like a list within make.com, because the output from this block won't be in a list. We're going to put in the search rows. We're going to keep everything, and then we're going to iterate or loop through each of the URLs that is returned. So put in the array here. Cool. So I'm just going to run the first 3 blocks first, just to make sure it's all working. So something's not wrong here. Refresh this. Am I using the right? So let's run this again. Okay, it's worked this time. So we've got now a iterator with our 3 different bundles, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be coming through. I think I'm not returning the actual data that we want. What is coming back? So we are getting the bundles, but it does not seem, we're not saving the values. So we do this again. We should be getting all the values now from the Google Sheet. So we've got, yes, 3 different bundles with the different URLs. Awesome. And then we'll just connect this up. Instead of this URL, we're going to scrape the URL from our iterator. And we're going to pass that into here. So that's all good so far. Yep. Then the JSON is we need to pass the output from here. Now we don't have an output yet, so I'm going to run through it from the beginning. I'm going to limit this to 1, just so we don't end up running this for too long. So we're just going to scrape the first URL. Unlink that. Cool. So we've got the output, looks like this. The address is not provided. We should probably pass in the title as well. So let me quickly do that. Just because the does look like the address is sometimes just in the title. So let's pass that in. And here, what we need to do is add in a new data structure. So you can see it's kind of annoying to do this all manually, which is why we have the extract method in Dumpling AI. And then we pass in the result from ChatGPT. And then what we'll do here is write back to the spreadsheet, choose the sheet name, row number will come from the iterator, which is here. And what we're going to do, we don't need to update the URL. We're just going to update it with all the data that we've now scraped. All right, cool. So we have this nice little workflow now. If we were using the extract method in Dumpling AI instead of just the scrape, we wouldn't need these 3 blocks. We could just use the single Dumpling AI block, but this is how you would do it if you're doing it manually. And if you're using the HTTP module, then you will need to turn this single Dumpling AI block into 2 to 3 different modules as well. Cool. So if we look here, these columns are not filled out yet. If we just run it, it should run on just the first URL. We're just running through, and if I wait here, this should update very soon. Awesome. So we've got the address, the value, bedrooms, and bathrooms. And this is only running on the first one because I limited this here to 1. But if I had 5, 10, whatever here, this will just keep running. Awesome. So that's a very basic scraping flow. Different scraping methods I talked about would just change what goes in between here in these 3 steps. Depending on what you're doing, you might have more blocks or you might have less blocks, but all the different scraping steps happen here. Now, this tutorial was probably not as structured as I wanted to be, more of a crash course than anything else. So if you do have certain scraping methods that you'd like me to go into more detail on, or you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback, feel free to leave a comment. But with that, I'm going to wrap this video up and I'll see you in my next video.